Today, ColemanNation welcomes Josh Denny. Josh was one of the first people who had me on his podcast, to have me on a podcast, on a video podcast, certainly. And he's also one of the first people, if you were ranking people in the country, United States of America, he'd be right up there. Josh, thanks for joining us today, you funny, funny guy. Josh Denny, comedy. Comedian,
you.
Cut up, revolution, rebel, Uber canceled guy. What have you been canceled on so far?
Man, it depends on the day of the week, Ron. I mean, you know.
Well, today's Friday. What's the Friday answer?
Yeah, probably my constant tweeting at Hollywood celebrities over their strange support of our governor here in California, Gavin Newsom. It's almost like he's unloaded the wallet to get a bunch of celebrity endorsements for the horrendous job he's been doing in managing our state, and he's feeling the heat from Larry Elder out here, and so he's pulled out all the stops in getting every celebrity under the sun to endorse him, and nobody really has any tangible things that are good that Gavin has done. Their whole argument is, oh well, let's just keep these white supremacists like Larry Elder from coming to power, which is pretty insane.
That right. So I mean, that is something that does trouble me. I mean, a man grows. A person's entitled to his opinions, but in terms of white supremacists, Larry Elder, he's the worst kind, the black kind. How do we? All right. So what happened? When you say you've been blocked by them, or has Twitter sent you warnings or something? Or?
No, what's weird is I really don't get a lot of warnings from Twitter. The only tweet that I ever put out, and this is interesting because the most infamous one was the 2018 one, where I compared the modern usage of the word straight white male to the historic usage of the N-word on the internet, basically highlighting how sort of passé and accepted it's been to just be openly racist towards straight white males or sexist or but the only tweet I was ever asked to take down by Twitter was a joke I made about the singer Billie Eilish, where I said that her music was so bad that Michael Jackson should have been able to get away with whatever he wanted to. And that was far more offensive than anything political, I guess, that I had ever tweeted. So I don't get a lot of warnings from Twitter. I think I'm very good at posing things in the phrase of a question. I use sort of the Jeopardy method of not getting hit with strikes. So I ask a lot of questions, or
That's interesting.
I infer a lot, so I don't really call people things directly or say derogatory things directly. I'm very good at insinuating it, and I think that keeps me from getting a lot of the slaps on the wrist that some.
You imply a lot. In other words,
yes.
You imply a lot. Yes, we infer. You imply.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Nice lawyer speak. This is why I need you to represent me, Ron, so that I don't make a fool of myself.
Represent you. Don't get in trouble, and you won't have to have me listen. If you weren't guilty.
I don't mean as a defendant. I mean, okay. I like how you automatically assume I'd have to be defending myself in a
that's
case.
The only reason. Well, but you're a professional talker. You don't need me to do the talking for you.
I don't know. Sometimes it'd be nice to take a break and just hand it over to somebody else.
How is your New Jersey, New York area tour? How did that go? Your East Coast tour, I guess.
It was horrendous. Much like you joked when we had those shows. You said, "Are you really going to do?" What was that weekend? It was not Yom. It wasn't Yom Kippur. There was another Jewish holiday that was that weekend. And
what time of year was it? Was it
end of March?
Passover, yeah.
Passover, yeah.
Right, because that's why I couldn't. Well, you were doing New Jersey on a Friday night anyway, so I wouldn't have been able to come.
Right, but I remember you going like Passover weekend. That's a good move, and it was not a good move. So not only did we did my show for like a handful of people, and then every other show in the club that weekend got canceled. And I asked the booker, I was like, "Well, is this like a really Jewish city that we're doing the show in?" Because it was in a Jersey sort of suburb of New York. And he goes, it's like 96%. I was like, that would have been helpful to know before we set all this up. But no, and then I did some shows in Wilmington, Delaware shortly, like almost a month later, and that was cool. I had a lot of old friends from the Philadelphia area and family and stuff come out. So, but it's still, live shows are still a very fickle thing right now with all of the restrictions and mandates, and the travel itself is a nightmare. So I've just kind of pumped the brakes on doing anything live until we get into a better place. It just seems like a lot of work for a lot of sort of questionable results, right? Like, I'm not at the level where I can put my name on a marquee and automatically sell out a venue no matter what the circumstances are. There are certainly guys that are like that in comedy. I am not one of them yet. So it's a little tumultuous at my level to be going out and trying to, make significant money on the road, where it's almost better to just sort of stay back and continue to build what I'm doing with some of these other channels.
So remind us, last time you and I spoke, it was 6 months ago or something. So what are you doing? Just to, give me a sense of, you got the locals thing. What's going on with you? Are you walking away from YouTube pretty much?
No, not really. I mean,
no?
I do some YouTube stuff. You can get my new podcast, Jankum, on YouTube, at least the first chunk of it. And then
Jankum?
Jankum, yes. Jankum, if you remember, was an internet, a fake internet trend, I think about a decade ago, where 4chan had sort of spread this rumor that kids are getting high huffing their own fermented shit, and the news media bought it and fell for it and thought it was this epidemic, and started reporting on it and it was totally a hoax.
Amazingly, I missed this.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you missed it, but
I live a charmed life, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. But it was interesting because
so you thought that would be a good name for a podcast.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like, and it made sense to me because I thought, man, so much of what we consume these days is absolute shit. I mean, and a lot of it is fake. So yeah, I thought it would be a great name for a podcast. Is it
fermented?
Yeah. No, that's a good call out. It's probably much more fresh. I think we're dealing with a lot of farm to table shit these days, especially in the media.
Farm to table.
It's not really getting a lot of time. We're not really pickling it, letting it sit in the barn like our good friends in the Amish community. This is
going to be the episode of ColemanNation that my wife is finally going to decide she's going to listen to, and it's going to all go down the crapper, as they say.
That's it. Well,
there's no chance of that whatsoever, by the way.
Well, and it's so funny because as I continued to build the branding for this, I was like, oh, this makes more sense than anything I've ever done. I was like, well, we'll release it on Monday, the shittiest day of the week. And most podcasts end up just, talking shit with friends of mine. And so, the branding sort of fits. I always found that with my other two podcasts, The Darkest Hour, which was intended to it was almost intended to be like an inside the actor studio for comedians. And then I would have guests on there, explain the format, and then they would start talking about current events. And then I would go, okay, well, maybe I need a current events show. So I did the Wake Up Call for locals. And then I would have guests on there. And then we would just talk about things that had nothing to do with politics or current events. So I was like, man, at some point, the idea of trying to shoehorn people into a concept for a podcast can be like herding cats. So why not just brand it in a way to where whatever we do falls under that umbrella? And so Jankum was born.
Well, it's funny because when I told people I was starting a podcast, or even when I've asked people to be on the podcast, they'll say, well, what's it about? And I always think, well, it's about me.
Yes.
I mean, it's an exposure. I mean, if there's anyone watching this, I'm astonished to think that you are offended by that. Don't pull my leg, okay? Ron Coleman's. I like Ron Coleman. Let's see how his conversations go with people that I might find interesting. But the lens is through the person who. Now, there might be podcasts where someone is really like a Jeremy Core podcast, right? Jeremy's like a real straight guy from the Midwest, okay? And he's not going to impose his personality on you. He's really going to be about the guest. But you and I, we're like Carson, Letterman. You come here for us, and by the way, if you're lucky, you get to see a cute Hollywood actress.
Yeah, I mean, and I have those on from time to time. I don't know why they do my show, but they do, and they're very gracious with their time. But Yeah, I mean, it's, to me, you're absolutely right. Podcasts have really become podcasts are almost like an extension of internet personalities you see online. And honestly, it's the last place where I get to sort of set the record straight on who I am as a person. There's a lot of people that try to interpret what I do comedically online in a bad faith way. And so I think it's always good for me to have some sort of
Who are
connection.
Who are you? Do it
Who
now.
am I?
Yeah, set it straight.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a guy who thinks that good ideas should beat out ideology in almost any situation. So, and I'm a guy who thinks anything can be joked about and anything can be made funny. Those are my extremist ideas, Ron.
Certainly, that does put you in the category of potential terrorist.
Yes,
and I'm sure that you're being monitored appropriately.
Yeah, no, that has been confirmed by my sister who works for Homeland Security. So after my visit, interestingly enough, I visited one of our mutual friends who's sort of high profile in that world. And my sister made it very clear to me that after that trip, I've been added to several lists. So that's sort of a fun situation.
I'm sure they appreciate knowing that your sister is sharing this information with you.
Yeah, well, she can't go into any specific detail, but she can be like, "Hey, man, you're on some radars."
Oh,
now, I don't know what that means. Maybe they just love my work. But something tells me, and based on the context of who she's talking about, it's not just that. So,
and now they might think that, well, if so and so thinks he's funny, he must really be good.
Yeah, exactly. That's precisely. I think you're onto something there. Yeah, if he thinks I'm funny enough to give me a show on his network now as well, then yeah, we better be cooking up something crazy. It is kind of funny.
Oh, okay. So that person. Well, yeah, well, I'm on that. Then I'm obviously been on that list.
Yeah, we're all on that list. Yeah, but so obviously we're talking about my good buddy Gavin. And
you must be. By the way, are you as hurt as I am that we weren't on that? Listed on that letter from the from the Politburo asking for the National Archives for records for January 6th of all these people.
Yeah,
I scanned it and scanned it and scanned it. Neither of our names is on there.
Yeah, it's one of the few hate lists I have been excluded from, ironically enough.
I feel like we're not. I mean, that's the A list.
It really is,
and we are not on it. Oh.
Yeah, well, we're like if we go back to the old Donnie Brasco terminology, right? Like, we're not made guys, but we're connected guys. So while you and I aren't necessarily insurrectionists directly, we're like the guy who finds diamonds for the insurrectionists, right?
Well, remember, I'm a consigliere. Okay, so. Yeah. Let's just say that on that letter, my name's not there, but there are enough of my clients and friends are on there that if those people were to turn over all their emails, my name might as well be on there. Because
I would probably tend to agree. Yeah, and what's interesting is you asked me what am I canceled for this week. I do go on these sort of threads. I think you saw the one from this morning where I have these like sort of unrolls on Friday mornings when I'm up late editing. Where I'll just sort of espouse some thoughts in rapid fire on Twitter, and I'll create a thread that's sort of like, here's sort of where my brain is at right now. And I do think some of those, I'm very uncensored with that and unfiltered. And I do think some of those border on what someone would try to make a case for is like stirring the pot or trying to like raise, activity against the government. I'm surprised nobody has ever really tried to make a case that that's what I'm attempting to do. But I really do try to pose the question to, our fellow citizens in our country of like, where is the line where people are going to actually step up and start to push back on some of these things? Because the willful compliance is horrifying. And, we talked about this before. I have a lot of people hate when you compare things to the Holocaust, but I have so many Jewish friends and many that are very conservative Jewish friends who observe Shabbat on the weekends and Friday nights and stuff. And
excellent time to observe it, by the way.
Yeah, it's the only time. I observe it on Tuesdays because I feel like that's what works for me.
That's your truth. And you're a very spiritual person, and that's what matters.
Yeah, I can't wait for new trans Jews to start saying, like, we celebrated on Wednesdays. You can't tell me when it is. Well, actually, God does, but sure, do your own thing. But my friends are often the ones going like, man, this is, if I talk to my father or my grandfather about what the playbook was in World War II, we're certainly pulling a lot of pages out of it these days. And it seems like everyone sort of pumps the brakes on that. They go, oh, no, it's not that bad. And they go, yeah, I'm sure people were saying that in Poland before it really got bad.
Well, the best way to avoid being accused of an inapt comparison to the Holocaust is to just refer to totalitarianism. So, because the fact is, the same techniques were not only used in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union and communist China, less so China. It was less so China, but because it was so very backward. So, and also just a whole different cultural story. But also, if you look at the French Revolution, which had periods from the terror really through the end of Napoleon, there were patches of very intense totalitarianism that you would not have trouble recognizing. By the way, also, England under Henry VIII, I mean, there was a lot, people don't appreciate how much monitoring of the citizens took place in earlier times. Also, I mean, really in Rome as well. But the point is, in totalitarian societies or authoritarian societies that are so authoritarian that it is hard to tell whether they're totalitarian or not, the same techniques are used where, the government is constantly broadcasting messages of compliance. And this is a point that Adam Townsend makes very well. Setting up the model for what the model for what citizenship is, and
almost like a social credit score,
right? But without actually assigning any values to it. But the world is made up of good Americans who take their vaccines and wear masks, and non-compliant Americans who are as good as insurrectionists, and in many cases are insurrectionists, who not only do they not take vaccines, but they go public with criticisms of the vaccines, or asking questions that are not in the spirit of our mutual benefit, and that, and et cetera. I mean, when you must have seen that screen splash from the the Homeland Security, what they were looking at ahead of September 11th for dangerous types. One was anti-vax. One was people who had the temerity not to believe that the election was fair and square. And one was it patriotism, people espousing patriotism or something?
Yeah.
It was something like really pretty, bread and butter kind of stuff. This is, this is pretty scary, but I do think to some extent what it is resulting in, because I still think we have a tradition in this country of independence among many, many people. Let's get out of the cities and talk about the American people, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people who are not only not buying it, but who previously would have been affected by this kind of propaganda, and who aren't now, like who now look at the government and other institutions with a degree of skepticism that they never would have dreamt that they would have had. That includes me. They're no longer entitled to this presumption of good faith or being here to act to our benefit. And that includes both domestic and foreign policy. I mean, you realize now that their agendas that they have are not the agenda of the people or even of the people elected to govern.
Yeah, and as much as it's easy to get wrapped up in comparing things to the Holocaust, let's not be that extreme. But it's interesting because we often talk in sort of like socio-political discussions about the American empire and could it ever fall. And I think a lot of times we go like, oh no, it could never happen. We're the world's largest superpower. It could never happen. It's like, yeah, well, Rome fell, and if you look historically, like Rome fell doing a lot of the things that we're doing now. I mean, it sort of started with separatism in terms of government, right? So they sort of split their government into two and said, listen, we can't agree on things, so let's just divvy it up and cut ourselves into two things. It'll be easier to govern, easier to manage. And
You're
then there
referring
was
to the Eastern and Western empires?
yeah,
Okay.
Byzantine and what was the other one? Just
Rome.
Rome, right? So and I do think, you know, you see a lot of politicians sort of floating that idea of like, maybe we need two Americas, or, you know, a lot of people feel like we already live in two Americas. And so we have this sort of idea that we have these two parties that will never come together. And what's really concerning is historically our elected officials have always said, regardless of partisan difference, we have to govern together. Well, now you're starting to see them diverge from that and saying like, maybe we should just govern separately or independently. And so that to me is sort of putting us on that path. The other thing that was a tremendous problem for Rome was overspending and rampant corruption, which is the world we live in now, where you see a guy like Gavin Newsom, you know, brag. And I got into it with one of your or was having conversations with one of your colleagues about California specifically, about how we have a governor here who's sort of campaigning on an $80 billion surplus that only exists because of a bad faith decision to withhold unemployment money from his population. So like where every other state in America decided they were going to match the federal dollars granted for pandemic unemployment assistance, Gavin Newsom said plainly, we are not going to. The kitty is empty. And so for that 6-month period here to start out, like I think it began in March going all the way to September was the original plan of stimulus to help people get back on their feet. California said, we're not going to pay it to our people, despite the fact that we tax them the most of any state. And maybe New York, I think, is still higher. But then to turn around and pivot and say, we have an $80 billion surplus and use that as some sort of feather in his cap to get reelected. It's unethical at the very least. And then on top of that, they also have the federal discretion if the unemployment reaches a certain threshold to just kill that federal money as well. So the federal government grants them the power to say, we're going to embezzle this money from its originally intended purpose and redirect it into whatever we want. And all they have to do is hit a certain unemployment threshold to do that, which they manipulated by opening in January for 2 weeks and allowing people to get back to work, reducing the unemployment percentage, hitting that threshold so they could kill the final 7 weeks of federal aid that people were counting on. And then you know, turns around and says like, oh, we're back to normal, so we're just going to keep the last 7 weeks of your 26 weeks or whatever of federal aid. And so this is the kind of thing to me that like historically would have a leader tarred and feathered making this kind of decision. And I've got Josh Gad from Book of Mormon and Frozen on the internet telling me that we need to keep this man in power because Black people are becoming white supremacists and trying to destroy our nation. It's insanity, Ron.
Well, but you know, you mentioned Gavin Newsom and corruption, but there's an aspect to that also, which my friend Thomas Donatelli, who I want to get on the podcast, I just have to figure out how to do it. He wants to do it. He's a semi-retired Wall Street guy who is the famous pizza lunch friend from my tweet a while ago, who had all these great insights. And he points out that there's a gigantic, and this happened in Rome too, a gigantic wealth cluster among a very, very small crust of people. But those are the people who are pretty much running everything. And they've grabbed a hold of government, of pretty much every aspect of government. And they're not just upper middle class or $1 million a year wealthy, which, believe me, that's a lot of money. But
well, now almost $1 million a year almost just makes your head above water, right?
Well, I would maybe in, you know, your neighborhood, I think I probably could take a vacation and you know, more than 50 miles from my home if I made $1 million a year. But I mean, talk like people who are worth hundreds of millions. In other words, the Wall Street class and you know, the technology class, these people who have just so much couple of things. They have so much money that nothing matters to them. They win regardless of what happens to the economy because they're hedged on every possible outcome. In fact, when they drive value of property and other assets down, it gives them an opportunity to, make a killing in, buying up assets that other people can't afford to hold on to. And they have nothing at all to do with regular people, zero. And as Tom pointed out to me, there was a time when you could come into an investment bank as a young analyst. And we're still talking about relatively elite people here coming out of the best schools, but you would rub shoulders with the top people and you could find ways to get into their offices and work with them and get to know them. And if you could pull it off, you could develop relationships and maybe you could go somewhere, you could learn something. Today, those people are hermetically sealed from support staff, from beginners, they're living in a completely different universe. And that's also true of government leaders. These people who routinely want to defund the police, but have their own security details still paid for by their, the government that employs them. These people don't feel the pain at all of what they put us through, not in the slightest. And that's a French Revolution or a Roman Empire kind of situation where you just have this let them eat cake kind of attitude, which, breeds a tremendous amount of resentment.
Yeah. And I say this all the time, is like, they want to tell us that the world is fine and it's a world they don't have to live in, and that's part of the problem with the way that our elected officials conduct themselves these days, is because they're essentially legislating in America that they're never affected by, even down to it's like, imagine being somebody who gets to legislate and regulate public transportation and you've never taken it in your life. That's a great metaphor for the way all of our government works. They're literally telling you that you can't go to your job because you need a vaccination. And these people, they have no frame of reference for what your day-to-day activity at your job is like, because they went straight from college to an internship at their super wealthy, connected families, hedge fund or firm or whatever, and then got into politics, and here we are. So, they're basically deliberating over the perfect society that if it fails, there's no consequence for them because they sort of live in a bubble protected by it.
But here's the scary part, and this goes back to our original conversations, because in many ways it's typified by the most important social class in America, which is the comics, or otherwise known as the comicendian, the comendian, the clowns.
Yeah.
You have this upper middle class, or even middle class, or wealthy wannabes, or elite wannabes. And in the world of entertainment, that's what every wannabe is, right?
Sure.
And they see their way forward as requiring them to identify with this elite and express contempt for their audiences. So those audiences shrink and shrink and shrink to just a self-congratulating sliver of people who are, the same people who are watching CNN. And that affects not just comics, of course, but other entertainers. This goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of of our interview today. Entertainers who, on the one hand, they've lost all track of what regular life was like, but they're cultural leaders, notwithstanding the fact that most of them are utter dimwits. Forget about midwits. These are dimwits. These are really brainless people. They can dance, they can sing, they look good. Do you see any realization yet creeping back into the core of comedy that we've reached a time where maybe a little bit more truth-telling is called for, or not so much?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because you talk about sort of there's almost a split in entertainment right
that's
now.
Amazing. If it's a perceptible split, that's an amazing development.
Well, it's predominantly, observable through the world of podcasting. And I mean that specifically about comedians specifically comedians, because I think comedians, the good ones anyway, understand that it is their responsibility to tell the truth and to be authentic, and that will cultivate their audience for them, right? Like I have to, for me to be successful, because I rail against the sort of prescribed worldview from the people who run the studios, or the people who work at the networks, or the people who represent both of those individuals. It's very clear to me that my capital will come from developing my own audience. And I truly believe that the only way I can do that is to really be myself, and to really say things that are meaningful to me and that I think will resonate with my audience. I think the Josh Gads of the world, these other sort of plug and play Hollywood types, they and the producers that sort of work with them, I think they believe that they can manufacture an audience under anything that they deem the stories that they want to tell. And what's interesting is they're even willing to sort of lie about that, to the degree of like they will watch a ship sink and say that, well, we made content that was for a better America, or we tried to create something that was in the vision of the world we all want to live in, whether it's popular or it has an audience or not. And so it's almost like you have one side of entertainment and comedy that wants almost like pure meritocracy only. Like, I want to be successful on the merit of what I do. And then there's another side that's like, merit means nothing. We can manipulate it any way we want to, and we'll just continue to tell the stories we want because we have this sort of weird moral superiority. We believe that the way we view the world is right, even if the numbers of support don't match that. So it is kind of strange that there is a split, particularly in comedy, where you have people that are now like system comedians, right? They only want to talk about subjects that are the approved point of view, the official narrative, the things that they believe that the powers that be want them to talk about, or that they're free to talk about. And then you have really free people who are willing to, stand in the face of authority and disagree, and do it in a comedic way, or a funny way, or an interesting way. And so there's absolutely a split. And I think comedy is almost like, it is the canary in the coal mine for where we are as a society, where if you look at what's happening in comedy, where there's almost like this civil war between comedians, of those of us who think that no one is beyond reproach, that no one is beyond being criticized or made fun of, particularly our government, and particularly the institutions that hold wealth and power in this country. And then you have the other side that are like the court jester, where it's like they will make fun of anyone, but they definitely don't want to upset the king. They don't want to upset his majesty to the point in which, they will lose favor.
Well, at what point do we start is there a showbiz, by which I mean money? Remember Steve Martin? The hills are alive with the sound of money. Reckoning for really, really unfunny comedy like Samantha Bee and Trevor Noah. I understand that people nod their heads and congratulate themselves on their virtue when listening to these people, but is it possible that anyone actually laughs?
Well, here's an interesting thing about Trevor Noah that nobody talks about. Why did Comedy Central pick Trevor Noah? Think about it.
Oh, I don't have to think about it very hard.
Yeah. So why would you pick? So this makes sense to me. Why would you give the most prestigious job in comedy to a relatively new, unproven comedian, right? Like when Trevor
Barack
Noah
Obama of comedians.
Correct. So, but when Trevor Noah was given this role, he was not considered a thought leader in any way. Like, if they had taken somebody like Dave Chappelle or even Michael Che, these people who have had some good historical sort of criticisms of systems of power, that would make sense. You would go, wow, these people are disruptors, and this mantle should be taken up by someone who's a disruptor. Instead, you take somebody from literally the last country with apartheid, in the modern era. You take this person who grew up in squalor and you throw them a few $1 million, change their life infinitely for the better financially, And now you have a mouthpiece that is so gracious and so appreciative that he wouldn't dare really question the greatness of the nation that he's in now. And so
you would think,
but in a weird way, it's like, so to me, it's like they bought themselves a corporate lapdog in going and getting somebody like a Trevor Noah, where they would never have the balls to take somebody like myself and put them on that show, who's really gonna, stir things up. And listen, Bill Maher is a guy who's very politically opposed to a lot of the things I believe and a lot of the directions I want to go in. But what I think is fun about watching his show is you almost watch him drift further and further to the right every week. And you're watching a man who is not dumb come to the realization that the systems that he believes in are failing him as well. And that even his side is corrupt and horrendous. And you're watching somebody sort of defect from their political dogma in real time, no pun intended. But
yeah, and I don't even know how I would go. What his show is on? Is it on HBO? Or something?
Yeah, it's on HBO.
But I see the outtakes that are traded around the internet, and it's fascinating. You can touch, even through the magic of video, the discomfort of his audience.
Oh yeah.
When he steps on that third rail and they don't know if they're allowed to laugh. And is someone going to see them laugh? Or they might not even be able to laugh because it's just so heretical what he's saying. But yeah, he once every couple of weeks hits it out of the park on something and really tells it like it is. But yeah, he's really established, and interestingly, remember, he's a second generation showbiz guy, and that probably gives him some of that confidence.
I didn't know that. I didn't know he was second generation.
I don't think his father was a performer, but he was in the business. I think he was maybe a recording engineer or something, or maybe he was in radio. I don't actually remember. I could be wrong about that.
But it is kind of a fun thing to see this person who, so to me, again, like a Bill Maher personality type is who should be in that chair. I mean, that's what I think we all loved about Jon Stewart, is Jon Stewart was not afraid to criticize his own party or people that represented his own beliefs when they strayed from common sense or they strayed from reality too far. And you even saw that with his sort of recent interview on Colbert, where you felt like they almost cut to commercial because he was just merely talking about just some of the insanity and the crazy lengths we've gone to try to avoid the truth that this was probably a man-made virus and that it was probably something that leaked that wasn't supposed to, and that we are playing God and manipulating science in a way that ultimately will be the downfall of society. And these are the kind of fire and brimstone
listen, that's all very interesting, but let's talk about Bill Maher's father, okay? It's getting much too serious. Bill Maher was born in New York City. His father, William Aloysius Maher Jr., was a network news editor and radio announcer.
No, okay.
And his mother, Julie Berman, was a nurse. Okay, so he was brought up as a Catholic, but his mother's Jewish, meaning that he's Jewish, meaning that that's why he's such a wise ass. But also his dad was in the biz to some extent. And you were saying something about a disease killing everybody? I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that, the thing that made Jon Stewart so likable as the host of The Daily Show for so many years was that, if his side and his team needed to be taken down, he was willing to do that.
That's all. But he wasn't the only one. I remember there was a Saturday Night Live sketch during the Obama administration called "What Would It Take?" And it was blacks, including white actors playing blacks. I don't even know if that's allowed anymore.
No.
And it was like a talk, a panel show format, and they would posit hypothetical things. What could Barack Obama possibly do that would cause them to not support him for re-election? And they would throw up these ideas, and nah, that wouldn't do it. Whatever it was. That was, and of course, Jimmy Carter. I mean, Jimmy Carter, that's the old Saturday Night Live, but also making fun of Bill Clinton was something. But, I don't know, maybe do they, that was the ethic of comedy until, 5 years ago. Now, of course, obviously the business considerations. I mean, I asked Adam Townsend, who's got lots and lots of big thoughts, especially about China and culture. Why is it that entertainment and fashion businesses, which are so capitalist and you would think would be so geared toward the market, and I keep using this example, why would a management of a Victoria's Secret try to sell lingerie using obese models? What would possibly, how did that possibly benefit? I mean, you can have this goes back to your idea of I want my work to be recognized for the quality, for the content, for the inherent value. It's okay the only inherent value of lingerie is to make a woman who is good enough looking to wear lingerie in the first place look even more desirable. And we're not talking about that with the kind of models that evidently that they're using. So,
well, you're bringing up something that's very much about, I think, the specific poisons of our cultural ideology these days, right? And so I said, what was the phrasing I used in that Twitter thread this morning? Because we're kind of going back to my central point, which was we are in a state of sort of godlessness, a state of what were the exact words I used? I said technology, godlessness, and childlessness has left us pudgy and purposeless. And what I mean by that is we are no longer an aspirational society, right? And when you say what is the primary difference culturally between us and the East, and I say the East because I want to culturally include Japan with China, even though they are very politically different. One of the cultural staples of their society is shame. And because we have sort of guardrailed our people from feeling shame, that we can no longer drive marketing or things that are sort of aspirational in nature, right? Remember when you were a kid and I was a kid growing up, like champions, right? Athletes, winners were people that worked very hard and had talent levels that the average person was incapable of reaching, right? There was no political incorrectness to saying that some people in our society are better looking, are more talented, or more athletically gifted, or more intelligent than others, and those
better
people
shape.
Or better shape.
Better shape is pretty much what better shape looks like, and
perhaps just more disciplined, right? But these are great people, and their greatness should be celebrated. Now
or at least they're great people in this respect. I mean, they might be utter jerks, but they are nonetheless great. I mean, gosh, Michael Jordan, you just can't be Michael Jordan without making your entire life about achieving what he achieved. I mean, that's how he got to do it. And yet, if you can't recognize that, no matter what your cultural frame of reference is, then then you're missing something.
And so the other end of that sword is shame for lack of accomplishment, right? And I think China and Japan are very, very good at saying, you don't have to be great, but don't be shameful. And unfortunately in America, we've gone so far to where not only do we demand greatness from anyone anymore, but we've also made it too taboo to make anyone.
Not only do we not demand greatness, right? That's what you're saying?
Right.
Okay.
Yes, not only do we no longer demand greatness from anyone, we want mediocrity to be viewed on a parallel with greatness, and therefore, and we also think making anyone.
Not only that, more than that, greatness is we're going to close charter schools. We're going to stop the SAT. All the things that are associated with discipline and getting the job done and hitting the mark. That's called white supremacy now. What?
Well, and the problem with America is we have killed exceptionalism in the name of equality. And I said, one of the biggest problems is that people think the dream of America is about equality. It's not. America is and always has been fundamentally about rewarding exceptionalism, being the best at something and being recognized.
And it's just outrageous that you and I have not been appropriately rewarded yet. And I think that's our point for today.
I want to be showered with riches.
I mean, we're so good. We're so talented. And you know, Trevor Noah. That's not right.
Yeah, he just bought his second house here in California where he doesn't even live and film his show. So, you know, it's and that can be a little discouraging at times where you just look around and you go, man, the people who sort of live with the proverbial boot on their neck, it's a pretty nice boot. And you know,
Nice,
their
nice
face is
boot.
being pushed down on a nice, cool, imported Italian marble. So maybe it's not that bad.
Josh, as usual, we've got it all figured out. Maybe some people will listen and come to a deeper understanding of what the truth is, but it's so unlikely. I mean, that they'll even listen. But we try.
That's all we can do.
I want to stay you for being, I want to stay you. I want to stay you. Stay. I want to thank you for always staying, for always being around and always being a good friend and always being up for a laugh and fighting the good fight along with the rest of us, and for coming onto the show today. Anything we should be pitching? I'm not sure we really got a chance for you to explain at the beginning when I asked you, because we started talking about meaningful stuff, but tell people where to find you and, you know, all those things, domain names and where to send them.
Yeah. People can go to joshdennycomedy.com. All my links to everything are there.
Magic.
You can check out my new podcast, Jankum, on every podcast platform. Check me out on Locals.
Is there any way anything we can do to get you to change the name of that?
Absolutely. No, absolutely not.
You change it like every 6 months, every 3 months, right? Okay, so
no, I've changed. Let's calm down. I've changed the name of my podcast 2 times in the last like 5 years.
All right. Well, you know, that's a disgusting name. This is
Yeah,
the America, the very America that you're complaining about, the lowered standards and the acceptance of mediocrity. And I don't even like that drawing. That's a disgusting drawing. Look right here.
Yeah.
He put a turd right on. Jeremy, do we have to use this podcast?
It's a crown of shit, Ron. It's a crown of shit. You know, show a little respect.
Well, you know, respect is earned. Respect is earned.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then of course I would be totally remiss if I didn't mention people can watch. I have a clip show that sort of mocks political shows called Next Week Tonight, which people can watch on censored.tv. New episodes every Friday. And this week kicks off the second half of season 1. So we have a big episode dropping tonight, and I hope people like it.
I do. I hope so too. I hope I like it. I hope I like it because I really want to like it. Josh, always a lot of fun. Thanks again for coming on. You're a deep thinker and you're a serious person for a comic, and that's why you are doomed, along with me, to living in you know, a click or two higher than a trailer. But you got to tell the truth. You got to be who you are, even if you're you.
Yeah, and you know, the idea that you can't take any of the money or anything with you is I'd just rather live a life that I'm truly happy with. You know, I have the least amount of money in my bank account that I've had in 20 years, and I'm probably the happiest I've ever been. So you know, I think that goes a long way.
I cannot let my wife listen to this podcast. It's just gonna be the end. All right, buddy. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Ron. You too.